Good evening, everyone. My name is Amanda Shay, and I would like to thank our sponsors, Amazon. Welcome to this episode of ARTDACITY, The Renaissance is Now. In honor of Jazz Appreciation Month, and it being a little over 100 years since the legendary Harlem Renaissance, which gave light to the genre of jazz that we love today, our episode tonight will be a conversation around the influences of our past with the current state in our arts and creative culture. Are we in a renaissance today? If so, what are its values and characteristics?
Some of the framers of what became the Renaissance make the argument that the artistic worth of a people has to be proven by the worth of the art and literature they produced, and especially for people that historically, over centuries, have been defined as without culture, without history, and without any record of achievement.
The Harlem Renaissance was the flowering of creativity that had been suppressed for centuries. People that had the sense that things were opening up. And finally, we can be the people that we imagine ourselves to be.
First, I would like to welcome Jija, performance poet, educator, curator, and storyteller. Bill Banfield, composer, musician, professor, author, founder and director of Jazz Urbane, and last but certainly not least, Gregory Grover Jr., saxophonist, composer, and educator. Good evening, everyone. How are y'all doing?
Hello. It's good to be here.
Wow. It's good to have you.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for being here. I want to first start with a couple of questions about the Harlem Renaissance and what you all see in today's conversation with our past and current state of creative culture. The first question, and again, we're going to do this in anybody can answer, who are some of your influences in the arts and entrepreneurship and why?
Sure, I can jump in if that's okay with everyone. I guess the first thing that happens when I think of some of my influences, I always start with saxophone. So I'm going to jump out of saxophone and then kind of work my way back in. When I look at folks who are really trailblazing and producing high-level art and not letting it be boxed in by one particular medium, I think of people like Jason Moran, phenomenal jazz pianist, but also is doing artistic director work over at the Kennedy Center and always finding ways to collaborate with other artists and other mediums. I look at, someone like Terry Lynn Carrington, an amazing jazz drummer, but is doing a lot in the field of education. She started the Jazz and Gender Justice Program, which is a program that helps dismantle some of the patriarchy that we've seen in jazz music and educating both our young students, both young women and young men, and non-binary students. I think of folks like local artist Kevin Harris, great pianist, who is always pushing the envelope to find ways to tell his story as a musician through people that he looks up to. So whether that be writing music for athletes and civil rights activists like Muhammad Ali, or when he put together this amazing project called the Baldwin Project, where he took excerpts from The Fire Next Time and really made an amazing, thought-provoking work. So folks like that, and then obviously the saxophone thing obviously comes right back to me. So John Coltrane is the obvious answer for most artists, musicians, anyone. Wayne Shorter, Joe Henderson, Walter Smith III, who's a younger, more contemporary artist, but is doing a lot of great work and constantly putting out amazing music, as well as doing a lot of work in the field of education. So those are some people who inspire me.
Dr. B, would you like to answer next?
Well, Gregory Gruber is hard to follow, but I think I could start with one of my biggest influences is Quincy Jones, the gentleman behind me here. He is a great mentor. He mentors me right now, and since I was a kid, I wanted to grow up and be like Quincy Jones. I think his passion, his craft, his notion of being a cultural kind of ambassador. I think he's an innovator, and he has such a wide lens. It's some of the things that Greg was talking about as an entrepreneur, but as a visionary, as a great conductor, a great instrumentalist, someone who truly believes in the power of art to transform the time we're in, and certainly as his historical, notion of being a griot, teaching us all about Black music in particular, but how Black music is an international forum that includes everyone in the African diaspora. So I would just kind of stop there with him. But I think that it's really important to talk about the notion of African griots, which is about these dynamic leaders like Gregory was talking about, who imbibe and imbue the communities with a sense of mission, so that the work is constantly about bringing people together, and then training other younger musicians or inspiring other musicians to continue that legacy. I think that's what the Harlem Renaissance is about. I think that's what the Black arts movement is about in the 60s. And I think even today's Black Lives Matter and Me movements movements are about that kind of forward progression of culture, how we carry our culture, how we critique our culture, how we create in our culture. And there are many men and women who are great examples of that. But for me, as a kid, even, it was Quincy Jones.
Thank you, Dr. B. Jija.
I love that response. I am inspired by so many things. I think recently I've been really inspired by Sun Ra, and it's just so beautiful that I'm here with jazz musicians, because I'm not a jazz musician by definition. However, I've been inspired by the way he creates his music, but also his language. And that's something that really inspired my recent work. And just my interest, my curiosity, I've been led by that. Also, because I'm in theology school, recently I've been introduced to a theologian or philosopher, just the overall, just a powerful house in this body, Shively Smith, who I think her theology, her language has really inspired the ways that I'm decolonizing what I grew up learning in church, and relearning my own relationship with God in ways that I could reflect that within my music. And another theologian is Cole Arthur Riley, although she wouldn't claim that title. I think the ways that she also uses language to embody the words of liberation, I think is really, really beautiful. And then I wouldn't be remiss if I didn't name my father, who is also a minister. But his storytelling, I think, has always inspired me. I think when I was younger, I didn't appreciate it because it always came with the scolding. But as an adult, I could appreciate the stories that he did share, whether it was biblical or stories that he was told to him, and that was used as lessons for our own journey. But yeah, those are the things that have really been moving me lately. Ask me tomorrow, it might be different, but today, that's where I'm going to start. Oh, and also let me name Toni Morrison. I think that's how I was introduced to learning how to write, and write in ways that I think can also be framed as theology in ways that I don't think she would name. But I think the way she was able to explore with language and tell stories has always inspired me to want to write and write and write, and erase and write again. Thank you for that question.
Ooh, powerful, powerful answers from all three of y'all. Thank you so much. Wow. So I'm a poet, and we snap. So if you see me snapping for some of your answers, I'm just like, yes, okay. How is the art created today motivation for our communities to evolve and develop forward? And a second question to that, is it opening the bridges of our culture's most difficult times?
Well, I'd like to jump in on that from Jija, who just she asked us a little bit earlier about the notions of theology. And I'm a theology major. My master's is in theology and the arts, and they sent me to Africa to study. So connecting with her today is so wonderful, and Greg as well. But I think the Toni Morrison thing really, I think, connects us here with your question, Amanda. And let me read to you what she says from No Place for Self-Pity. She writes, "This is precisely the time when artists go to work, There's no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. She says, I know the world is bruised and bleeding, and though it's important not to ignore its pain, it's also critical to refuse to succumb to showing or arising from any notions of malevolence of this. So she said, like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom like art. And for me, it really speaks to the idea that this is the time that artists go to work with their things. I mean, we often look at the Harlem Renaissance, which was that community coming together, young artists, whether it was Langston Hughes or Zora Neale Hurston or Ellington, they were all trying to have this vision about where the Black community in the diaspora should be going, but also they felt like that was a model for where America's going. And to your point, Amanda, today we're in a, I asked my nephews and they say Uncle Bill, this just feels like chaos to us. The whole thing just feels like a world of chaos. And Toni Morrison, who has been a big mentor of mine, I've worked with her. She's commissioned me for works, and she would always make sure that she said to me, Bill, no matter what, at the end of the day, it is the value of your work that counts. So even in difficult times, we as artists have to keep, at every generation, have a dialogue about what that is, keep the vision on, and keep putting the great art out there to transform the time we're in, even though it's a challenging time.
Anyone can answer or add in addition to what Dr. B just said. Any one of you.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I agree, Dr. B, and thank you for those thoughts. I guess the way I look at it is that when I think about the question, Wayne Shorter talks about all the time. He says the question is the answer, in a way. And when I just hearing, instead of thinking about how does it help our communities evolve, I think the artists have evolved back to tapping into their communities and pouring into their communities and reflecting the times and the hurt and the pain and the joy of their communities, particularly within this time. I mean, I think about my mother and what her mother would tell her: you use what you have, right? Always go back to what you have and tap back into those roots. So when I think about myself as an artist, when I think about the spaces that we strive to be involved in, we look at, okay, I want to perform, as some artists might want to perform at Symphony Hall, other artists might want to perform at Carnegie Hall. But beyond that, I think we've tapped back into a space where we see the value in the work that needs to be done in our communities and that is happening in our communities. And we're using that as a fuel to produce our art. And so when you look at how is our artistry pushing or helping evolve our communities, I think it's actually a give and take on both ends. I think we're pushing and evolving each other as artists. The more and more we continue to tap in and create these spaces that are not necessarily our traditional formats of what some people may value as where art should take place. Gija and Dr. B and I were talking earlier before we started about a really amazing cultural and performance aspect that happened, visual montage that happened just last spring, that Dr. B and Jazz Urbane put together. It was Roxbury's Night Out, I believe was the term, but the idea was we put together these beautiful performances that were stationed right at the old Ferdinand, now the Boston Public Schools building where Jazz Urbane will be taking place, right in the heart of Nubian Square, right in Roxbury, right? We didn't need to go far in order to have these amazing performances and rich art could happen. And as a result of that, people outside of the community, because we talk about how we bridge that gap, which I believe was the second part of the questions, are now looking into what we're doing and seeing the importance. And not to say that it didn't exist before then. These spaces were always taking place. These conversations are always happening. We're always pushing the envelope as artists, as community members, as engaged community members. But I think now, much like the Harlem Renaissance, that yes, we look at a time period of when it happened, but these artists didn't just appear in this moment, right? In Harlem, they had these ideas, they had these thoughts, they were having these conversations. Other people decided to look in later on, and put a value on it, but these conversations were happening. So I think as artists, as we should be striving to always be engulfed and really embedded in our communities, because that's where we grow from, and in return we can help the growth within our communities as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. I love that on so many levels. And you said so many things. And I want to start off with, I just think it's so interesting how I feel like Black folks and time, it's just the relationship is really interesting. We're never present. It's always, we look back at the past as some form of like fantasy, like oh it was great or whatever, or we look at the future as one of those things where we're just like beyond liberation, freedom, and rarely do we ever look at the present. And I find this question really interesting because I feel like the Harlem Renaissance, yes, was documented and recorded as this beautiful Renaissance, but I think we've always created spaces and just kind of to piggyback off of what Gregory said, we've always created and used what we had to create art, to tell the story or to record that time at very moment. It's never been documented by America or the world in that way, but we've always used our art, our creativity, our prayers, our stories to record our time or what we're experiencing. And I think we just, I really hope and would like for us to also be present, because even now I think there's so many things that are recorded and shared, and in many ways I think a lot of people are going back and forth about how it's shared, but it's still shared, it's still recorded. And if only we look at these times and appreciate just the beautiful Renaissance that's taking place every day in your neighborhood, in your church, in your school. Like, if only we appreciate those things, we will notice and like be able to lift that up in any ways. I think would do us much justice than to say, oh, this thing happened at this time. It didn't stop. It did not stop. It kept growing and evolving. I mean, I work with young people now, and the ways that they think about creativity is way beyond what I was thinking at that age. And as it should be, they saw what we could do and they're thinking beyond that with little. And I just, I found what both of you said really powerful and beautiful. And I don't think it ever stopped. I don't think we ever stopped, reflecting the times. I think it's evolved and transformed in ways that we can't even imagine. And I'm thinking of Sun Ra. I'm gonna just keep bringing the brother up, but I know a lot of people like to call him a futurist, but in many ways he was like, no, y'all keep telling me about the future. I'm telling y'all, let's go to space right now. Like, I'm from Saturn or Mars. Like, it's right now. I'm telling y'all that we could go there. You just got to give me permission. We just gonna go. And in many ways, I think I feel like we've always been beyond ourselves. Our work has been beyond ourselves. But I'm stop.
There is no way you can pour water into a basket and expect the water to remain. Isn't it through water that we learned about praise, about holding breath, about worship, about life?
Don't stop, Gija. What you just said was absolutely beautiful. I'm over here snapping, so thank you for that reflection. It just reminded me of Nina Simone's, "It is our duty as artists to reflect the times," right? And that goes into my next question. The Harlem Renaissance came during a time of despair, since we're talking about time, in our country and community, and a way to speak out through artistry. What do you feel today's artists and creatives are trying to represent through their work, and what values are being pushed in our latest Renaissance?
I would. These all are so exciting, and I just our guests, our colleagues here, including you, Amanda, just creating such a wonderful question. I want to go back to our several things about the Harlem Renaissance. Let's be clear about a few things as it relates to we talk about that notion of artists. Let's be clear what we mean about that. Let's be clear about the focus of the members of the Harlem Renaissance and what they were intending to do, because artistic intent is absolutely critical. These artists were all about the same age. Let's look at this. They were all born about the top of the century, about 1900. Zora Neale Hurston, and Langston Hughes. It goes on, County Cullen, all of them. So you can think about a group of high school folks. They're about 19. This is 1920 that it started about. It goes from 1920 to about 1935 before the Depression comes and it folds down. But they intended as artists to use their art conscientiously to think about the time they were in and project where we needed to go. It was a conscious decision. So when you ask what are artists doing today, I'm not always clear. There is a conscious decision about a group of artists who decide, if you look at the neo-soul movement, they were critical in Jill Scott. It goes on and on, Speech and Arrested Development, all of those folks, Maxwell, they had an intent to do something that was different than what the industry dictated they were going to do. So I think we need to be fair also and say, while we look back and we're a continuum, when we look back, let's be clear about what we're looking back to and why. Those artists were clear about what they were concerned about. I'm not sure that the mainframe artists are all that sure. So when you say the Renaissance is going on today, let's talk about what Renaissance is going on today. And are we talking about, Cardi B? Are we talking about film? Are we talking about, arts, real, concert arts and arts, visual arts, what have you? Because I do believe every generation does have a Renaissance, but I think that generationally we need to kind of look at what was the intent of those artists, and do we see, vestiges of that same kind of intentionality today? And I'm just asking our panelists, who are a little bit younger than me, what are you feeling are the impulses and the intentionality and the goals of today's young artists? Is there such a thing?
A question within a question. I love that, Dr. B.
Yeah, I can jump in, or Gija, I'm open.
Gija?
Yeah, I guess, Dr. B, you raised a really, really good point. I was having a conversation, I'm sure you know Scott House over at the Banner, and we were having a conversation about spirituality and jazz.
Yeah.
And that led me, he asked, why do you think there's been this uptick in particular with spirituality and jazz? Part of the reason why he asked about the Negro Spiritual Songbook Project. And he kind of asked me, who are the other people who are doing it? He mentioned some names. And what that told me was that I think one of the things that as young artists we've had, the blessing that we have in this time is, and one of the things that we're continuing to fight for, and kind of what our fight is. Well, number one, there's so many different fights that we're looking to take place and be represented in our artistry. But I think one of the big ones is your identity. And I think that's one thing that across the board, all artists share in being open with who you are, how you identify, and what that means, both in terms of how you identify in terms of pronouns, but beyond that. Like, yes, I am a Black man. Yes, I am a Black Christian man. Yes, I am an educator. How do all these things come together and tie in with that? And how is that proclaimed through my message, through my artistry? And in addition to that, can I show that in a way outside of just playing the saxophone? Can it be showed in another interdisciplinary way as well? So I think that's one thing that artists today, if you had to say, I forget the way you coined it, Dr. B, but just essentially what is the basis in which we stand for? I think a big one is identity. And I think having this time, particularly obviously the pandemic slowed us all down, and it, had it tried us all in many ways, but it did give us a space to sit down and think and reflect on who we are as a people and what message we'd want to send out into the world. So for some people, it might be putting together, okay, I have the license and the freedom now to put out a record that talks about identity, or talks about the struggles of my community, or talks about my relationship with God, how I identify God, who God and what God is to me. I think we've seen an uptick in that. So I think instead of, contrary to the Harlem Renaissance, where it was a concentrated effort to say, this is the message that we're pushing forward, this is the thoughts that we'd like to see our communities, work through. I think there's so many of them now, not to say that there weren't before and that they weren't valid, but there's so many things as a community, as a country, as a world that we're dealing with. And I think it's up to each artist to figure out what that is for them, and then being okay with saying, this is what I stand on, this is what I'm sharing with you all, this is what I'm still grappling with and I'm still trying to figure out. And it could look very different artist to artist.
Okay, great.
For sure. And I love that you posed that question. And one of the thoughts that I went back to was the quote that you read by Toni Morrison, and how artists are supposed to reflect this pain, this time, and all of these things that we are experiencing in the real world. Whether you see it on a magazine cover or whether you see it down the street, there are people who are liberated sexually or are claiming these things about themselves. And I'm just kind of, I don't know what the magazine was about or who was on the cover, but I'm just kind of like going off of things that humans' bodies are experiencing in our everyday life. You use Cardi B as an example, who openly talks about her experience stripping. And so she brings herself in ways that I think as artists, we are aiming to reflect, being authentic in the stories that we tell and who we are and the songs that we sing. And I think when I spoke about our relationship with our past, I think a huge part of me is not neglecting the history or the stories or the songs that were shared, or even the accolades that a lot of Black leaders and Black artists have reached in the past. I think in many ways, I think those names should be uttered and repeated and told often. And I just find that we're not able to be present in ways that's appreciating what is being created now, even if it's ways that is not in the same alignment as our past did it. I think what I think is that we as young artists now are recreating new ways of telling stories in ways that's much more authentic. And I think I'm being repetitive here, but I think identity is a huge part, but also authenticity in ways that's renaming things or retelling things beyond what we are told or how society expects us to be. I hope that answers it, but that's immediately what I thought about. And I think Toni Morrison also requires that of us as artists, to reflect that pain in ways that may not be appropriate, in ways that we are taught to be what appropriate is, or what being normal is beyond that.
I love that. And you definitely answered the question. I love that. Y'all are dropping some gems, okay? This is a beautiful conversation. Thank y'all for just being transparent and being open and honest in this conversation. I want to talk about influence, and I also want to talk about impact. We talk about it. Dr. Bill, you brought up Cardi B and Jija. I love how you said, sexual liberation, because it is true. We are in a time where, when we look at the past, certain things that Cardi B is speaking about today would not be deemed appropriate in those times. And we are kind of moving into that generation now. I feel like just more of in an honest way and being authentic to ourselves as an artist. Are artists and creatives of today aware of their influence in our communities and the world? And what is the difference between influence and impact to you all? I added a secondary piece to that question just to kind of.
I often get in trouble with this question. because
Good trouble, right? Good trouble.
yeah, I want to be like John Lewis, get into good trouble, which I don't
Good
mind.
trouble.
One of the things that I've enjoyed is being able to. I'm a little older than you all, I think. I'm maybe 4 or 5 years older than you all, and I don't mean
Like
this in any
two,
kind
like
of
two.
yeah, like it's just that I want to claim some of that because as a musician, I started out. I came to Boston. I was teaching at Madison Park High School. The year was 1980. And I was a full-time Boston public school teacher, and I at the same time was a full-time student in New England Conservatory. And like Gregory Groover, it was just, and Gigi as well as you all talk about education. I was able to see young people that were in grade school and middle school, and then I watched them because I was also taught on Mission Hill in middle school, and I was doing this to teach to raise money so I could pay for my education, and I got recruited in the school system at a very young age. I was 18 as a full-time Boston public school teacher. My students were 17. Okay. So I had to learn how to grow up as a young person, separate my identity out, as Greg and Gigi talked about, and be a professional and realize the impact that I was having as an educator and a musician on these younger people. And what I've been able to see is the development of great Black music that we got from the past. And I see how young people grow up in that. I am challenged when I come here many years later. I'm a professor of African American studies at one of the biggest music schools in the world. And I'm a little disturbed sometimes that our young musicians are not aware of the past you all are talking about. Some of that is just the nature of the times that we're in. But it is our job as griots to, in fact, think about how younger people are being impacted by the world that they're in. And we should be concerned, I feel, as artists. And what I tell as an older artist to the artists that I work with or I educate or hang out with, and we're having these conversations, always be aware of the impact and the influence your work has. I'm not sure if we look at BET, the producers and the young artists, I don't mind getting in trouble with them because, I say, I'm not saying that they aren't. I'm saying, I wonder if when they produce these records, and I'm talking about mainstream Black records, mainstream, you can look at your list, top 10. If the top 10 list of records, not jazz, because that jazz is not in the mainframe for Black people anymore, unfortunately. Let's talk about what this generation listens to when you're on the green line or the red line or the purple line. Let's find out what that young group of people are listening to. I'd like to ask you all, are you sure that the contemporary mainframe music that we listen to today, that we claim as ours, is pointing us towards the right direction for our community? I'm just asking.
I think that's a legit question. No, I think that's a legit question. It reminds me of, I think, was it New York? I'm not sure where, but they're trying to ban trap music. I forgot what sparked it, but there was a huge thing, and somehow the mayor there was like, I want to ban trap music. And I got into a really interesting conversation with a friend of, I just think it's really interesting how we could, I don't live that's not my everyday life to live like the trap music that is played. I don't know it to say that I know what that experience feels like. So I tread lightly when I say that I think it's really easy to critique and talk about how these artists choose to say whatever it is that they need to say, whether, because I talk to my kids a lot about this. I'm going on a tangent here, but I talk to my kids a lot about what it is that they're trying to say. If they want to say F that B or F the cops or whatever it is, like, and I try to get them to pull out stories from what exactly they mean. Like, what do you mean when you say F the cops or F the 12 or F that B? Like, what's the story there that you are trying to say, rather than these just like very much so simple language that is going to get people hyped. And when that New York thing came out, a part of me was like, I wonder if he actually went to the neighborhood and seen what the conditions were in the neighborhood and actually, ban something, like I don't know, get jobs in the neighborhood or do something in the neighborhood or give money to the nonprofits and the organizations that are working in the neighborhood. So that these students who are, or these young people who are talking about this lifestyle can have different perspectives on things. And this is just me, and we're just kind of having this conversation. Both of us didn't grow up in that type of lifestyle, but it just made me think about how often, and I'm very, very, very conservative about my music. So there's some music I just don't play. I don't care for it. And even in the classroom, when my students play it, I'm like, but what did he say? Like, what did the brother say? But I love having conversations with them because they're like, you don't know, and da 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 da, and they're explaining things to me, and I'm like, so why didn't he just say that? And they're like, well, it don't go with the beat, and I'm like, oh, okay. So like, I think, but to me, that conversation made me really think, like, what happens when we actually go in these neighborhoods? And not to say that we're not doing that, because I know that individually we all have work in community that's helping rethink the ways in which we can exist. But when government and people who like frown their nose at these young people who are saying these things, I would like a dialogue. What did you mean when you said that you wanted to kill da 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 da? What he do? And I can only imagine how much more impactful that would be, rather than shunning them or isolating them, because that only makes them bigger. Because then they're like, well, they're not playing none of my deep music, so I'm gonna make the music that's gonna get people hype. And I don't really have an answer to what you said, Dr. B, but I just, sometimes I wonder, like, what if our response was a little differently,
Yeah.
Jija, I just want to add in there that I feel like you didn't answer the question, because you are going back to your youth, asking them, well, what are you trying to say? And that is making them aware of their influence and their impact in the things that not only are they listening to, but things that they're going to be creating. So thank you for that. Asking those types of questions is getting them to understand that words have power, and what we're putting out here in the world can stick and can influence people and change the way that people think. So I definitely think you answered the question. And I love that you push it back a little bit on, like, well, why didn't they just say it like that? And getting them to understand and digest and dissect those, the music that they're listening to, because that does speak to impact. So thank you for that. The youth, okay? I love that. Gregory, would you like anything to add?
Yeah, this is such a weighted discussion, and I feel like there's so many things that if I start in one area, I may not get to the full scope of what I believe and what I struggle with when I think of this. I mean, I guess there's a couple themes that were brought out, dialogue being one of them, having dialogue, what we're doing right now, having this conversation, and how important this is for us to keep this going on. So I think of, like, when Dr. B, as all of us as educators, there's always going to be a gap in where your students are either the lack of where they know now versus the expectation of what you hope that they would know, and also in terms of what they may value, and you having a little bit more of hindsight, a little bit more wisdom, say, hey, check this out again. And that's part of what we do as educators, to help, bring out that other aspect that we hope that they see in themselves and see in the artistry that we all know and love. But in that, and I think we all agree with this, is that it's tough at times not to. The other theme was with dialogue comes lack of judgment, right? And to try to really sit and grapple with what they are listening to. Like, for me, I always think back, if I played my mother, my grandmother, if I played them some of the music that I enjoy listening to, that I know is high art, right? What would their thoughts be? Like, both my mom, grandmother, they all grew up in Brooklyn, and one of the great Brooklyn artists of all time, God rest their soul, is Biggie Smalls. Now, we can all agree that Biggie Smalls was an artist on the highest level. right? I mean, in the same way, someone who, thank God Donald Harrison was bringing him around jazz, who's checking out Clifford Brown, checking out Charlie Parker, doing the homework in addition to explaining his experience and what he saw in his neighborhood every day. Now, for me, I may not completely understand that experience because I didn't grow up in that manner. And some of the words or the phrases that he would use to describe that experience in such a real way so that you really could come into his world, my mother, grandmother, and their mothers would not appreciate, and fathers and so on and so forth. So I wonder what he could have been, or what some of our artists could be, if we allowed them a chance to evolve with the time that they have on this earth. So I look at, there are tons of artists. I mean, like Nipsey Hussle, who's doing a lot of great work in his community. Didn't always agree with every word he said, loved the music, but could see that he was in himself figuring it out as a young person, what the message he wanted to share with people and how the impact and influence was going to be portrayed, and often struggled within that. Like, okay, I want to talk about, uplifting my neighborhood and literally buying back the block and putting together stores so that, we could keep some of this currency happening within. But I'm also telling the story of my gang affiliation because that's a very real thing. And how am I trusting at the same time that a young person listening to this will choose one area versus the other, right? While telling the story of like, we have to get into real estate and do all these things. Does that seem too foreign for a young person? It might be easier for them to go another way. So, I mean, given that, I mean, I struggle with that because for me, that's music that I like, and I listen to my students, some of the stuff they play, and I say, oh Lord, wow, but I wonder how much of it, if I sat and listened and spent some time with it, could I see a message within it? And then also within that, I mean, I have to also be honest that this is not just one of those moments where like, oh no, there's, take a second and listen, there's all good art. There is a lot of garbage out there. There's a lot of stuff that I myself wouldn't trust, myself to consume on a daily basis. And I do worry about what our youth is what they're on a daily basis, what they're listening to. But at the same time, I don't think we're talking about, as all of us identifying as Black people, we're talking about Black art, but I don't think it's exclusive just to Black art.
No,
and I think one of the things that we have to worry about, I know we'd all agree with that as well. And one of the things that we have to think about is why is this being pumped in? And what is the motive and message behind it that we're not seeing, and how that influences our communities, and with that, also being mindful of, I just lost my train of thought. This is what I was worried about, like even just entering in this bubble of a conversation, because I know I missed something. Within that, also being mindful of, I guess the role we play as artists to continue to counteract that by putting out a positive message, putting out how we would like our communities to be viewed, how we would like what message we'd like to put out there. But then also giving grace and giving patience and trying to learn to always understand the other perspective, and which may not be as easy to come across, and which on face value could seem like something that we don't want to touch, an anti-movement. There was another thought I had. If it comes back, I'll jot it down, and maybe if we have time, I'll jump out. But so much to grapple with there.
I do want to share, Gregory, you just made me think of how every generation has their thing. And once they get older, they tend to like look it's a looking down because I do it. Look down on the new generation of music, and a part of me is like, why is that a thing? Because I hear how when blues came or was introduced, and Dr. V, Gregory, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but when blues was introduced to the world, how the gospel community kind of looked at blues as this like secular type of music, or was it jazz? I'm not sure, but every generation I think has looked at music with had looked down at the new types of music that's introduced with kind of like their nose up. And I'm wondering, and I get it, I have my justifications of this day's music as well, but I'm wondering what it is that makes us do that and not embrace it as much. I don't know. I'm just wondering, and both of you please share your thoughts if there are any, but I'm just wondering why that happens often.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that you all are all saying that we all are doing here, this is a great model for the Audacity series here. It's about dialogue. You have to have talks. And as long as everybody's talking, then they're sharing. And then people can, like you say, not look down on perspective, just look across at the perspective, not down on it, but across and say, oh, there's some continuity here. There's something that that's what we have to do. Just get people at the table to talk. Greg, references jazz tradition, and we can talk about hip hop and R&B and gospel and trap and all the musics. All of them are Black musics in the diaspora. They all did essentially one of the things that's a through line is they talked about the people's condition. They talked about it and they sang about it and they danced about it and they ritualized it and they prayed about it. And this is something that both of our dear colleagues have talked about. But I think in terms of the jazz stuff, it's really interesting too, because each generation of jazz thinks that the new generation of jazzers are pulling the tradition down. I mean, basically Louis Armstrong looked at Dizzy Gillespie and what they were doing and said, well, they're just doing any old thing. And then, Ornette Coleman was doing free jazz, and the beboppers said what the free jazzers are doing in 1959 is some old crap. They're just doing anything. And then the next generation, Art Blakey's doing, kind of a soul thing. And it's like, he's bringing soul into jazz, and we go on. And then Miles Davis is bringing the younger ones in who are interested in electric music and bringing electricity into jazz. And that creates fusion. It just continues. You just keep all this. As a result of the dialogue comes fresh new music. That's the beauty of it. The result of that dialogue, fresh. Yes.
An influence. Everybody is influenced. Yes, Gregory.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think because of that, and I remember one of the thoughts that I had, but it is interesting that, and I'm a Black man, so this is the space in which I occupy, and I feel a privilege in having the space as a Black man. I'm happy to have it, as a Black, just being Black in general. But this dialogue seems to happen a lot with Black music, and I remember there's a conversation where Jay-Z talks about this, where he says, like, you don't ever hear like country music, like, not beefing, but for lack of better words, beefing with like Northwest country music versus Southern country music. And this is actually the right way. And you know what I mean? But it's always happens. And he was talking about in hip hop music, but as Dr. B and G-John knows, this happens in all forms of Black music, Yeah. And I think part of it is a healthy conversation, or I should say, could be a really healthy conversation, because as Dr. B says, it does help push music forward, right? If Miles Davis wasn't having these conversations and didn't have a change and say he wasn't hearing music like that, we wouldn't have all these genres that have come as a result. But I remember the other thing, just tying it back to impact versus influence, I would just be mindful, and this I remember now, it was just be mindful of the role that social media the internet and all that plays into this. Now, I'm thankful we have this new form. I mean, we've all been Zooming. All of us remember Skype, and all of us remember, how great it is to have FaceTime. This whole new platform that we're using today to bring us together is so hip, right? But with that also comes a peek into the artist's life that I'm not sure we had the last 10, 15 years. So with that being said, I can look back and I can read Miles's biography and say, ooh, okay, there's some stuff there that if we knew on a larger front, I don't know that, today wouldn't fly. But at the same time, that's what I can say now. Whereas a lot of the artists that we talk about that we do say are maybe having a negative impact, sometimes we're combining also areas that they promote or areas that they allow us into their personal lives that have nothing to do with the actual art or has less to do with the actual art that they're putting out, which then has a negative impact on our youth as well, or not even on our youth, on people, on our communities, on each other. So just being mindful that in addition to the music and the art, it's also this other area that we're still trying to figure out how to use. And, I look at bands like, I was just listening to I Am, Earth, Wind, and Fire, that record earlier today. Like, I know and love and hope that they were all wonderful people. But if there was a phone in front of them all day and they had access to promote any message they want, could there have been some things as young artists that they were struggling with because they're still trying to figure it out as well, and they've been able to evolve without having to deal with 140 characters that they could have access to say things that maybe aren't always in best practice. So that's another thing I just want to throw out there as well.
I love that you brought up the social media aspect, because I absolutely agree with that. I think that is a huge, it's definitely transformed how we view people and how we look at the artist and their art, for sure. I love where this conversation is going, but we're going to transition now to what we call Soul Bowl, which is where we've asked each of the panelists to prepare a question to ask the other panelists. And I want to start with Jija. Do you have a question for the panelists?
I do. I feel like you should have been like, so. I'm just kidding.
I wanted to do that, but I was like, is that too much because of the soul train?
Do it.
No, I think you can cut it in. I think your producers can cut it in. They can put it, in caps, and then Soul Bowl time. It's really easy to do. Let's do it.
I was like, I don't want to copyright what Soul Train is doing. I don't know what that sound is. Thank you.
So I think all three of us have. So one, I'm not. I think I said this before, and I'm not trying to downplay what I do, but I do want to make clear that I'm not a jazz musician by trade. I'm appreciator of jazz. Yes. We're gonna go with that. And a lot of my work is more storytelling and performing art and a combination of sound. But I'm really influenced by how free jazz is kind of like put all together very chaotically. And so in many ways, I tried to use words. Is that I think the last poets called it jazzatry. Yes. And so that's what I'm claiming for myself. But both of you have relationships with church. Gregory, I think last time we had a conversation, you mentioned that you played at church and was on tour at some point in time. And Dr. V, you mentioned that you have a master's in theological studies. By the way, I attend BU, so I'm at your alma mater. And so I'm getting my master's in theological studies. And so I've been really influenced by Sun Ra. There is a question, and I'm writing a paper on him, so this is kind of personal, and I'm going to use it in my paper. But there is a question that I pose from reading a lot of his work, because he wrote pamphlets. He wrote a lot of words, and he was really inspired by the Bible, but he was also inspired by the Greeks and how they built society, and he was just a magnificent mind. Anywho, the question that I have for the both of you guys, being influenced by spirituality and the Black church, and jazz, and the ways that touches people, that how your music touches people. And both of y'all have worked on Negro spirituals. I did my homework. And a question that I have for the both of y'all is, what is your own theology of living? And what is your theology of living? I feel like that's a simple question.
That's a good question.
Greg.
Wow, what is my theology of living? Well, I think for one, it's number one, okay, obviously there's the obvious one that hopefully beyond any religion or theology. We're all taught as young people, as you know, in kindergarten, right? The golden rule: do as to others as you'd want them to do unto you, which is basically saying do good, right? Coltrane talks about being a force for good and being a light for good. I think the biggest thing that my theology for living is that, and I'm saying this in real time now, as I'm not sure that I've thought about it in this way, or at least coined that term and attached it this way. But the main thing for me is that I continue to reevaluate, continue to learn, continue to process, and continue to grow. I think if those things are happening every day, and if I'm leading with doing good to people and treating people the way I'd like to be treated, and if I'm leading with love and I'm leading with grace, and then I'm trying to reevaluate who I am as a person, where I missed the mark, where I could have done better, where I could have loved more, where I could have given more grace, been more patient, and seek out more, right? And look back on the things that I know that I believe in, and wrestle with them a little bit more. As long as I'm doing all those things, hopefully on a daily basis, if I'm being honest with myself, hopefully maybe on a weekly basis, monthly basis, depending on the season. But as long as I'm in this constant pursuit of trying to betterment myself and better, which will in turn then better the people around me and better my community, and the young people that I come in contact with on a daily basis. That's my theology, and for life. Obviously, I am, as a Christian man, I think I believe in the work and the life of Christ, and I let that be my guiding force. But I've always believed, and I've always felt that not to be standoffish of other forms of beliefs, other people's beliefs, and other tenets that come along with their belief systems, because it could help feed not only my mind, which is an important thing that we all have, but also my heart for humanity. So hopefully in there answers your question. But I want to say thank you for the question, because it also allowed me to do what I know I just said, which is to reevaluate, to think, and to have some time to reflect on how I'm getting better every day.
Yeah, I thank you for that. Thank you both for that. I love that question, and I'm always trying not to be the long-winded professor, but I can't get away from it. So I'm going to still try. You asked a question you asked us earlier when we were talking among ourselves, and I just have to remember a few things. That when I was in Harvard Divinity School, one question I asked the professor there, and you're part of the BUTI, so you know that I was able to do a year at each of these places, Boston University, Harvard, and Gorton Theological Institute, because there were professors that I wanted to study with who were dealing with these questions of ontology and theology. So theology, for everybody listening, we're not trying to be too fancy. It's just the Greek word logos, which is wisdom and knowledge about spirit. That's religion, that's spiritual, that's dance, that's song, that's meaning, that's all that. It's the talking about. Theology is the logos, the Greek word about God and spirit. And so for me, it's coming to a realization that I asked my professors, what should theology be doing? Professor Gordon Kaufman, he was teaching nuclear theology, as a matter of fact. It was a class called Nuclear Theology. He wrote the book. And he said, Bill, and I must have been 25 years old when I asked this question. He said, the duty of theology is to illuminate the path and to move the people beyond. To illuminate the path. If you're doing that, that's what good theology is. And I think a lot of us, a garbage man, a school teacher, a boxer who fights for righteousness, all of those things have a theological path if it illuminates the way of people to see and move beyond. And in that beyond moving is where we find God. I don't mean to preach Reverend Groover, but there it is. That is the way in which the steps of our path lead us forward. So when you're doing that kind of work in whatever thing you're doing, that's the work of theology. I always tell people also, if you look at the Bible as a source, there are many, many sources of inspiration and maps of truth. But the Christian Bible says, in the beginning, God created. So I'm like, I want to be like that creator kind of thing. So as a creator, I feel like my theology is about creativity. And then the other thing from my African studies and going back and forth in diaspora studies in Cuba, I've been back taking scholars and artists back and forth to Cuba for the last 5 or 6 years. We've gone there 9 times, do concerts to study the linkages of Africanism and spirituality in Cuba and in the African diaspora. It's always the griot's job, guys and ladies who do art, to take that wisdom and pass it on. So I believe, to your question, is to take, I say music is tones organized to tell human stories. We have to talk to young people about their human stories. You all brought this up. We have to keep telling the new stories that keep us illuminating our paths and moving the people on. And that's all I'm trying to do as a God-given person who's given me gifts and experiences, to do that and make sure the art does that, and to try to lift people, lift their spirits as we're doing. And that's what we all try to do. We all believe that. So I just think we have to keep that dialogue going and keep that praise going, keep that ritual going, keep that spirit going, keep that wisdom moving, and move the people beyond. I love that question.
That was beautiful, Jija. Thank you for posing that question. I had to write that down: illuminate the path and lead us forward. Wow. So Dr. B, what would be your question for the panelists?
I have questions for both of you. I'm really excited. Now let's take another hour to do this just alone. I'm interested in your paths as artists. Like I say, you all are just a little younger than me. So I'm interested in finding out, I'm just intrigued, what things are you finding are barriers, barricades, struggles in the current culture that you're finding as artists? What are you running into that helps me and helps everybody listening and watching us? What should we be watching and leery of that's in the way of the great art that you all are creating moving forward?
Ooh, that's a big question. I'm going to attempt to answer it. I feel like a barrier for me is the lack of spaces.
Yeah.
I think the lack of spaces, I think that we do still have a lot of gatekeepers. So to cultivate space and engage with community is really, really difficult right now. I mean, obviously we're coming from a pandemic, so folks are still concerned with safety. And in addition to safety, I think equity and accountability are also two barriers that I feel, to me, that is kind of keeping us separate, to be honest. I struggle with, like, what does equity look like and accountability look like, and what does safety look like in a space with everyone and it being inclusive? I'm still struggling with that. I feel like that is a barrier. I don't feel as though, and I could be mistaken, but I don't feel as though as a community and as artists that we sometimes consider what accountability looks like and what safe spaces look like for the community at large. And we don't have these conversations of if and when somebody is harmed, or if and when someone is not receiving equitability or being given the opportunity to be in space with community. What are we doing? How do we work through that? What does restorative justice look like for us? What does safety look like for everyone? So I feel like for me, right now, is the lack of spaces and the safety around congregating with one another. And what does that look like as a whole?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. So that's my answer for right now. Jija or Gregory?
Yeah, I have so many answers for this one. But I think one of the things that I complain about often is, I guess it's also one of the beautiful things, but constantly having to produce to be relevant. I think I find that there is a beauty in being seen. And I love that social media and the internet creates a space that we could be seen in so many ways. Like, if you wanted to to explore something, you could create an audience. And I love that. I love it. I love the power that is kind of like within our own hands. But there's this thing that people says that if you don't produce, then you get forgotten. And I don't like the sound of that. I don't like the thought of it, because there's still music that I still play, and these people aren't alive, but they're still in my memory. They're still people that I play and are entertained and are healed by. And the narrative that, like, if I don't produce, then I'm forgotten online, to me scares me. It doesn't make me want to produce more work. It makes me want to be like, I'm going to keep this for a while and until I can constantly produce, which then turns into and people will forget you. People be like, girl, where you been? I ain't seen you on social media. And I'm like, I'm alive. You got my number. You can call me, I have stuff online, but I think because there's so much produced, there's so much like that people see often. It's like, if you don't see the person, and it works for selective artists. I think it works. The mystery works, and these artists have been doing it for years. But the people who are kind of just now becoming famous, or work is now being recognized, is just, I think for me, it's been a huge challenge of constantly producing, because I'm not a machine. There are months where I just want to kind of not even be online or want to be seen by anyone. And a lot of my work, I think I have to think about ways, as I'm producing work, I have to think about ways that it can constantly be in people's faces. And I don't want to, but I have to. And I think that's one of the barriers that hinders my own artwork. Of wanting to create and share. I think that's one of the things that really hinders me.
I love that you said that, because it also speaks to intentionality, right? So you're an artist who creates with intent. How do we do all this work, and still be able to still have it rooted in the intent and share the messages that we want to share? Thank you for saying that, because that was a beautiful reminder for me. Visibility is definitely a thing. Gregory.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely, and it's funny because I felt so seen in what both of you, Amanda and Gidra, said, because I felt like the only way I could really answer this question was if I just spoke from my perspective, and then hearing you both speak, I said, oh yeah, that's right. We're all dealing with the same struggle. We're all doing the same thing. So I think for me, I'm part of it is, there's a big, but I will go back to me. There's a part of me, and Dr. B, you know this because we've spoken about this at length, is that there is a part of there's a judgment thing with having this access to being able to put out whatever at any moment, and being almost pushed by peers, by industry, whatever, to have output, to feel like you need to do it. And then when you don't, or if you haven't yet, or if you're still not confident what you brought out yet, there's this kind of weird charge within yourself where you're saying, oh man, is this okay? Is this good enough? What do people think of the project? And then also, in addition to that, and this is going back to conversations we've had, Dr. B, the whole instant gratification of the whole thing, that we have to be honest with ourselves as artists, we do thrive on to a degree. You put a project out, and there's excitement, and then maybe it doesn't, it goes away, and it takes a while for people to really live with it, because these things live on forever, and as they should. And hopefully all projects stand the test of time. But in this instant gratification world that we live in, if you don't have this huge success, or if you don't have all this attention on it, it can be hard. And I think one of the things about the pandemic that was a blessing for me within it is that, when I think about the physical performance, Gidra spoke about this, having to play a ton of gigs, be out there playing, being visible in that way. And one of the cool things about the pandemic that was challenging, but it helped me address something that I need to figure out as a performer, the instant gratification of being in the room and getting an applause from people after you play, after you speak, after you do whatever. When that went away and you're doing a live stream, which we've all had to do at this point, we're doing it now. And then it was like, oh, after you play, what is happening? What's going on? And you didn't have that same feedback, that immediate feedback. That was really challenging for me, and to continue to see the value in what I do when it wasn't attached to that gratification, or it wasn't attached to feeding the needs of others. But what it did help me do was it helped me focus more, as a jazz musician. I play with 3 to 4 other people that I say I love, people that I say that I spend a lot of time with and know very well. It helped me kind of focus inwardly on them, and why I was doing it for them, and that interchange between them, and less when the audience was taken out. And that thing, it helped me get tapped back into why I do this and what this music is really about. So that's what I struggle with as an artist. But there was a theme that came up that G-Ja spoke about and Amanda spoke up that had to do with my question that I had for both Dr. B and G-Ja and Amanda. So if I can, I'd love to just throw it out there now.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes.
So both of you all, one of the things that I'm interested in, part of the reason why I continue on with the Negro Spiritual Songbook and that project, is bringing music to spaces, or jazz music into spaces that aren't traditionally venues or art spaces for jazz. Like one of the questions that one of my teachers, Danilo Perez, spoke about when we were studying with him, I remember it very well. He spoke about, you all are, if you're just trying to play the village vanguard for the rest of your life, you'll be trying to do that for the rest of your life. And it may or may not ever happen. When you get there, if that's the end goal, that's a one time a year, one time every few year thing. How do you create spaces for your art beyond the traditional jazz venue or art spaces that usually house the art? So I look at, what Dr. B is doing with not only Jazz Urbane, but all the other connections that you're making throughout the city to produce art, and nationally as well. And then G-Ja as well with, it's fitting that we're talking about the Harlem Renaissance. We're looking back and, with the Black Cotton Club, which I'm interested in. When I saw that in your bio, I said, okay, is that a physical space? Is that a thought space? Or what is that? How do you all as artists create spaces for your art to live on beyond, okay, I'm playing at Symphony Hall, I'm playing at this jazz club? What does that look like for you, and how are you doing that?
Yeah, so one of the things that moves me is like, I feel like church is like the central theme for me, but like church and how before we got to big churches, when I was younger, we would just meet in people's houses, and that would be where church would be. And we would meet in people's houses until we were able to afford a building, and then even then we were at the back of a salon, and then at the back of a salon after that, then we got an actual building that looked like a house, but we turned it into then a sanctuary. We turned it into a sanctuary in the terms of like what people imagine a church to look like. And so with Black Cotton Club, I think I'm just really inspired by spaces where people can exist, and they turn the space into what is home to them. And so we started off at the bookstore. And it's not that I went there and I was like, yes, I can picture poetry. I was like, this is a space. And they were willing to let me do it for a really good price. And I was like, can we move the books around? He was like, yeah. And I was like, you still gonna be open? And can y'all, still sell books? And he was like, yeah. And then we just, we existed in that space. And I think often I feel like as artists, we're always thinking about stages that are presented for us or built so that we can then go on. But I'm like, there's so much beauty. And I think that's what the pandemic also showed me that, and shown a lot of people. Like, no, the stage is whenever you start to perform. And, subway performers are also a beautiful example of that. People are not even paying attention to them half the time, and yet they're still performing, but that is still a stage. And I think in many ways, if we just seen the stage as where we are, or the church as where we are, then in many ways, I think we would then perform whenever we felt led to, or we felt moved to. Yeah. Does that align?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really don't have anything else to add to that. I know the question was also addressed to me too, but I have nothing to add to that because I feel like G-Ja said exactly what it is. I feel like even now, we're not thinking about traditional stages. We're thinking about where we're at and what we can turn that into. It's the energy, it's the space, it's the sharing of the art. I don't think about stages anymore. I just think if we're outside and it's a beautiful day, we gonna be outside and we gonna be in the park and we gonna do what we do. And I think everything that Jija said is exactly on point. And I just wanted to name that frugal bookstore in the heart of Roxbury was where you were referring to, right, Jija? I just wanted to shout them out because that's another
The
space that's
word
going
says
to
where
hard
two
time. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say the word says where two or three are gathered, Gregory. So where two or three are gathered in the name, in whatever, in music, in spirit, then let it be. So
Absolutely. I just want to thank you all for this amazing conversation and the questions and the feedback that you all have had. Thank you so much for your time. I just want to say thank you all for joining us at home. The Audacity series will be released over the next couple of months and on our website and YouTube channel. Before I close, I just wanted to let Dr. B answer that question. And then I also want to hear about all of the upcoming beautiful things you all have happening.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I love what you all are doing to bring us together to talk and have dialogue. I think that's what we all agree, that artists have to have dialogue to connect to people. So I can put all those things together. I think one of the things is the Jazz Urbane Cafe, which we're building and we are excited about. It's been a long trajectory for this build out and this development. But at some point soon in the future, coming, will be the Jazz Urbane Cafe in Nubian Square. The Nubian Square is going to be developed in the next 5 to 10 years as the cultural spot in the city. It's beautiful what's happening there. And people have been waiting for decades, but now we're here, we're all developing it. So look out for the opening of the Jazz Urbane. Even though it's called Jazz Urbane, it's going to have Jill Scott performing there. It's going to have spoken word and dance. All of the arts come together. It's an eatery space, incredible food. It's a space that you want to be in. Like Sunrise says, space is a place. Well, Jazz Urbane Cafe is the space where all this stuff is happening. It's going to be in the center of the town, in that iconic historical building that everybody that came here from all over the world that went and got their furniture, they went to the Ferdinand building. And that's the building we're going to be in. So you'll see that develop. And both of our artists, we have been doing things in there over this last year. And when it opens, we'll all be there. So I want to talk about that. But I think spaces are important because it's the place where people can come together in community and have ritual. So you're right, wherever two or three are gathered, but when we can do it and put all those things together that you both talked about, illuminating the way, have that dialogue, reach the young people, think about how we're moving our culture forward, that is going to be significant. I've been very spoiled because I've been able to work in radio, public radio, and work in recording, and work in concert halls and jazz halls, and also work in reconvening. I was a part of the Beehive. I was its first music director. When we started there was just mice and dust in the basement. And now it is one of the biggest places that people go in the South End is the Beehive. I'm so really proud of what we did there. We moved that to Daryl's. We'll be at these other places. So we as artists have to create the spaces all the time. Upcoming, I think that's the biggest thing I'd like to say about upcoming things that kind of brings in the question you all answered or asked about is what we're doing with the Jazz Urbane Cafe here in Boston. And it's been wonderful to share with you all. This has been so rich. Thank you so much for having us here.
Thank you all. I just want to give you all an opportunity. Gregory, thank you so much, Dr. B, for that. I cannot wait to come, okay? First in line, I'm going to just let you know. Gregory and Jija, what do you have coming up and what would you like us to know? Where can we find you? Please promote.
So currently my voice is at the Napoleon Jones Henderson exhibit at the ICA. So that's a different area that I'm kind of exploring with soundscapes. So please go check out that exhibit, not because my voice is there, but mainly because Napoleon Jones Henderson is amazing and is based here in Roxbury, and the work that he creates is also creating space. And yeah, please go check it out. Also, I am currently fundraising for a folklore project. I feel called to archive and record a lot of folklore griots and folklorists in Ghana. And I'm planning on going to villages in Ghana to record stories. And this is something that I'm really passionate about. I believe that these stories should be archived and recorded in their native tongue because right now a lot of our mother's tongue are being kind of watered down or being forgotten. And I just think that this is a way in which I'm building for the future. I'm creating future and hoping that people are able to retell these stories. And yeah, I'm also working on a project called Wilderness, which will be out in the summer. So yeah, pray for me. And yeah, thank you so much for having this amazing panel discussion. Amanda, thank you so much for being an amazing moderator. And Gregory and Dr. Bill, it's been such a pleasure to be in conversation with y'all. I've been fans with y'all, so it's really great to be in conversation with you.
Hija, before I ask Gregory what he has coming up, could you please let us know where can we donate to for raising funds for your folklore project?
Yeah, GoFundMe and PayPal and Venmo. I have the link. So maybe that's easiest to do. Also, I didn't mention that Black Cotton Club is also having a summer series this summer. So stay tuned. Everyone bring your instruments, your voices, your drums, the songs that you've been singing in the shower. Bring that too, your poems, all of it. We would love to have everyone there.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that. I'm like, you talking about a fundraiser. Where can we donate to? We need the people to know. Gregory, what do you got going on? And congratulations for Black Cotton Club coming back for a summer series.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, first I'll start off. I'll be mystified and say thanks again to Amanda and Maya and Miss Morris and everyone at BAMS for making this happen. And G-Jaw, this is great to get a chance to hang. We were saying before we started, we met recently. I'm sure we come in contact beforehand, but we met officially at Daryl's the other week. And then now we're in community and connected, it seems like now forever. So that's the way the world works, which is, I'm thankful for that. And then Amanda, it's nice to meet you. And Dr. B, you know, big heart for you, and I'll be with you later on this weekend as well, making some music. So I guess playing your music. So I guess I'll start there and big up in that project, playing with Dr. Bill's, you know, his Imagine Orchestra and his one of his musical babies that he you know, he's got a lot of things going on, but we're a lot of projects. So I'm playing with them. We'll be at Longy on the 25th, which I believe is a Monday, April 25th. But then also with my own project, I continue residencies representing Jazz Urbane at Daryl's Corner Bar and Grill. Kitchen. I don't know where I got grill from. Over the next few months, as well as some things I look forward to in May, playing in Cambridge for the Jazz Boston Jazz Always series. This is a really cool project that I'm presenting of new music entitled Lullaby, and it's songs about love that I've written throughout the pandemic and more recently as well. So I'll debut that music, and I hope to record that this spring. I also will be continuing on making music with my Negro Spiritual Songbook project. We'll be playing at the end of the summer, save the date, the Mission Hill Arts Festival. And I just got word today that the Celebrity Series will be covering that event, and we'll, you know, be doing their thing with that. So that's really exciting. Louisa Harris is the brain behind the Mission Hill Arts Festival that she's been putting together for the last 2 years now, as well as continuing on with playing with Charles Overton and different folks throughout the city. So I'm really excited about that. Hoping, you know, like I said, recording the Lullaby project this spring and then recording another project with my band this summer. So I'm really excited. If you want to check out the Negro Spiritual Songbook, please do check it out. Spotify, Tidal, Apple Music. It's released through Jazz Urbane, so I'm thankful for that. And hopefully I'll see you all soon.
Thank you all so much for this conversation. Absolutely beautiful. Wow. I just feel really full right now in this moment. So thank you for the reminders from all of you. This was absolutely amazing. Yes, I don't even know what to say because there's really nothing much to say left. I'm going to be following all of your journeys and making sure that I attend everything you all are doing. Thank you for your continued work, and thank you for just this beautiful, amazing conversation this evening. We really appreciate it. As y'all know, my name is Amanda Shay. I have a EP coming out, a poetry EP. It will be my first project ever. Now I get why people say it's like your baby, because you literally are birthing this. So I'm excited for that. I've curated a couple of events for National Poetry Month. So stay tuned. Look out for some events at Mass Poetry and Lulamon on Newberry Street. I'm really excited about that. And I just want to wrap up the rest of the conversation by saying, like, thank you again for joining us this evening. Thank you to our audience for staying tuned. Please make sure that you follow and check out every single person on this panel. They are doing the work. And I also want to say that our Audacity series will be released over the next couple of months, like I said before. And you can check out the website and the YouTube channel. That's bamsfest.org. The next episode will take place on Thursday, May 26th, 2022. And I just want to say thank you to Gigabit for being here with us and being in this conversation and doing all of our video editing and filming. You have been amazing. I want to thank our sponsor again, Amazon, for sponsoring this event as well. And if you'd like to be the first to hear about upcoming BAMS Fest events, you can visit www.bamsfest.org and sign up for the monthly newsletter. I have, and it's so informational. You don't want to miss that. And if you would want to follow us on social media, like, comment, and share at BAMS Fest. And until next time, thank you so much, Dr. B. Thank you again, Gregory. And thank you again, Jija, for this beautiful conversation. I hope you all have a really beautiful night. Thank you.